The HOA thought they had him cornered. A $100 a day fine, threats of liens, and the smug confidence of a board that crushed every homeowner before him. The letter was short, sharp, and suffocating. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting tales. So in the letter was violation notice. You are hereby fined $100 per day for noncompliance. Failure to pay will result in legal action by the Riverton Estates Homeowners Association. For most residents, it was a kind of letter that sent their hearts racing and their wallets emptying. The HOA was notorious for its iron grip, but for Daniel Carter, the man who opened it that summer morning, the notice carried a bitter irony, because the land beneath every driveway, every manicured lawn, every swimming pool in Riverton Estates belonged to him, and what followed was a battle that would rip apart a small town, expose corruption at its core, and leave one man fighting not just for property, but for his name, his family, and his life. Riverton Estates wasn't just a neighborhood, it was a statement. Nestled on the outskirts of Riverton, Ohio, the gated community was marketed as a pinnacle of suburban living. Tree-lined streets, identical mailboxes, and a glossy brochure promising peace, safety, and community standards. But behind the picket fences and flower beds lurked something far darker. The Homeowners Association, a board of 7 self-appointed residents, ruled the subdivision with unchecked power. Paint your shutters the wrong shade of blue? Fine. Park a car on the street overnight? Fine. Plant tomatoes in the front yard instead of petunias? Fine. And the fines weren't small. $50 here, $200 there. It added up, and if you didn't pay, the HOA had the authority to put a lien on your home. Daniel Carter was 46 years old, a civil engineer turned small developer. Tall, quiet, with weathered hands and a stubborn streak. Daniel was not the kind of man who sought the spotlight. He had grown up in Riverton, left for college, and returned years later to buy up parcels of farmland his grandfather once worked. When a developer approached him about turning that land into Riverton Estates, Daniel made what he thought was a straightforward deal. He sold off the development rights, but kept title to certain portions of the land, easements, roads, and common areas, as leverage for future projects. The paperwork was complicated. Most homeowners never knew, but Daniel knew. And when he built his own modest home on one of the parcels, he figured it wouldn't matter. He kept it himself, paid his dues when reasonable, and ignored the politics of the HOA. Until the summer of 2017. It started with a shed. Daniel built a small, sturdy wooden shed in his backyard to store tools. Nothing fancy, just enough space for a lawnmower, shovels, and his kids' bikes. Within a week, he received the first letter. Unapproved structure. Remove immediately or face fines. Daniel laughed. The shed wasn't visible from the street, and his deed, the one he still kept in a fireproof safe, specifically allowed for outbuildings. He wrote back, politely, citing his rights. The HOA doubled down. $100 per day. Neighbors whispered about it at barbecues. Why doesn't he just tear it down? One asked. They'll bleed him dry. But Daniel wasn't like most neighbors. He didn't tear it down. Instead, he opened that fireproof safe, dusted off his old survey maps, and decided it was time to remind the HOA who really owned Riverton Estates. The fight quickly turned legal. Daniel hired a local attorney, Rebecca Hall, sharp-minded and relentless. Together, they combed through the deeds, plats, and contract from the original subdivision sale. And there it was, the smoking gun, Clause 14, Subsection C. Ownership of roadways, common areas, and easements shall remain with Daniel Carter as heirs or signs in perpetuity. The HOA had authority over homeowners, but not over him. And technically, they were trespassing every time they drove their shiny SUVs over his roads without acknowledgement. Daniel Carter, calm, methodical, but increasingly angry. For him, this wasn't just about a shed. It was about principle, about standing up to a system designed to crush individuality. Rebecca Hall, attorney motivated not just by the case, but by personal history. Her parents had nearly lost their home years earlier to HOA fines. For her, this was personal justice. HOA board, a mix of arrogance and fear. Some members, like President Richard Harlan, enjoyed wielding power. Others worried they had picked the wrong fight. Community, divided. Half admired Daniel's defiance. The other half feared his rebellion would tank property values. Escalation. The HOA claimed Daniel hadn't paid dues in years, fabricating charges. Rebecca produced receipts proving otherwise. Retaliation. Daniel's mailbox was smashed. His tires slashed. No one admitted responsibility. The police filed it under vandalism. Breakthrough. A whistleblower, a secretary on the HOA board, slipped Daniel a folder of internal emails. In them, President Harlan wrote, "We need to break him. If he wins, we lose control." The court hearing in late 2018 was packed. Reporters crammed into the wooden benches. Neighbors lined the walls. The HOA's lawyer argued Daniel was in violation of community harmony. Rebecca rose, calm but fierce. She projected Clause 14 on a screen for the courtroom to see. Then she dropped the hammer. "Ladies and gentlemen, this association has fined, threatened, and intimidated my client. But here's the truth. They do not even own the land their bylaws claim to govern. Every road, every patch of grass, every so-called common area belongs to Daniel Carter." Gasps rippled across the room. The judge leaned forward, brow furrowed. "Is this accurate?" Rebecca handed him the deed. Signed, filed, recorded, undisputed. The judge ruled in Daniel's favor. The fines were voided. The HOA was ordered to pay his legal fees. But that was just the beginning. Daniel won, but victory brought consequences. The HOA board faced humiliation. Richard Harlan was furious, vowing revenge. Rumors swirled of secret meetings, of new plans to get Carter where it hurts. Daniel's neighbors were split. Some congratulated him quietly. Others avoided eye contact, afraid of being associated with him. And late one night, as Daniel locked his shed, he noticed headlights idling at the end of his driveway. Watching, waiting. A week later, another letter arrived in Daniel's mailbox. But this one wasn't from the HOA. It was unsigned. No return address. Just a single sentence on plain paper. "You may own the land, Carter, but we own this town." The HOA had been humiliated in court. Their $100 a day fines thrown out, their authority gutted. Their president mocked in front of half the neighborhood. For most men, that would have been the end. But not Richard Harlan. To him, Daniel Carter wasn't just a neighbor with a shed. He was a threat to the system that kept Harlan powerful. And if the board couldn't beat him in court, they would beat him in the shadows. After Daniel's victory, Riverton Estates was divided. On one side were residents who admired his defiance. They left him thank you notes in his mailbox, shook his hand quietly at the grocery store, and whispered that he'd done what everyone else was too scared to try. On the other side were the faithful, the ones who believed the HOA's iron grip protected property values. To them, Daniel was reckless, selfish, dangerous. The shed wasn't the issue. It was a precedent. If he could ignore the board, what stopped anyone else from breaking rules? The tension hung heavy. At block parties, neighbors stopped talking when Daniel walked by. At HOA meetings, Richard Harlan dripped venom into every word. It started with the lights. One evening, Daniel came home to find the power in his house cut. Not from a storm, not from unpaid bills. The breaker box had been tampered with. A week later, his car tires were slashed in the driveway. Then came the calls. Late at night, his phone would buzz. When he answered, there was only silence or breathing. Rebecca Hall, his attorney, urged him to report everything. The police took statements, but without evidence. The cases went nowhere. Vandalism, they said, could be kids. But Daniel knew better. This wasn't random. This was targeted. Rebecca started digging deeper. She filed records requests, combed through the HOA's financials, and soon found something far more alarming than fines. The HOA board had been funneling money, thousands of dollars, disguised as maintenance expenses, paid to show companies that didn't exist, and whose signature was on every check. Richard Harlan's. Worse. The funds came from liens the HOA had placed on struggling homeowners, foreclosing on families who couldn't afford to fight back. Rebecca's voice shook with fury when she showed Daniel the documents. They're not just corrupt, they're predators. Daniel Carter. The petty harassment only fueled his determination, but he feared for his family, especially after finding his teenage daughter crying when she saw the word traitor spray painted on their fence. Richard Harlan, HOA president, a man unraveling. Once smug, now obsessed. The HOA wasn't about property values anymore. It was about power, his power, and he would destroy anyone who threatened it. Rebecca Hall, attorney more invested than ever. Each discovery was fuel for a personal vendetta against abusive HOAs. But she worried. Exposing corruption this deep could make her a target too. The community, fear spread. Some homeowners began to ask questions. Others looked the other way, terrified they'd be next on the board's list. The break-in, one night, Daniel's shed, the very symbol of his defiance, was broken into. Nothing stolen, but the walls were spray-painted. Quit or else. The whistleblower returns. The same secretary who had leaked emails before contacted Rebecca again. This time, she was terrified. It's bigger than fines, she whispered. Harlan's got connections. People outside the HOA. They don't just want Carter gone. They want him ruined. The disappearance. A homeowner who had supported Daniel publicly vanished overnight. His house emptied. His car abandoned in the driveway. The HOA claimed he moved suddenly. His friends weren't convinced. Rebecca filed a formal complaint with the state attorney general, attaching proof of the financial fraud. Days later, Daniel came home to find his front door ajar. Inside, his house was trashed, papers scattered, furniture overturned, and in the middle of the living room, taped to the wall, was one of the old violation notices. Scrawled across it in red marker. Last warning. Daniel refused to back down. He installed cameras, reinforced locks, and doubled down with Rebecca. Together, they began preparing a case not just against Harlan, but against the entire HOA board. But the harassment escalated. Cars idled outside his house at night. Neighbors who once supported him stopped answering calls. Even his daughter begged him to let it go. "You've already won," she said, tears in her eyes. "Why can't you just stop?" Daniel's answer was simple. "Because if I stop, they win again." Late one night, Daniel received another envelope. Inside wasn't a fine or a threat, but a photograph. The photograph wouldn't leave Daniel Carter's mind. There he was, standing in his own backyard, looking up at the shed, unaware that someone stood less than 10 feet away, watching. The picture wasn't grainy. It wasn't distant. It was sharp, close, personal. On the back, one line in red ink. "Next time, we won't miss." That night, Daniel barely slept. Every creak of the house sounded like footsteps. Every set of headlights crawling down the street felt like a surveillance van. For the first time, he admitted it to himself. This isn't just about an HOA anymore. Someone was watching him, closely. Someone who wanted him scared, cornered, and silent. But Daniel wasn't wired to run. Rebecca Hall, his attorney, studied the photo under a magnifying glass. The angle is not from a window. It's from the ground. Your yard. Daniel frowned. So they were inside the fence? Rebecca nodded. Trespassing, which means escalation, which means they're getting desperate. But when she flipped the photo over again, her face paled. The ink wasn't just red. It smeared slightly under her thumb. It wasn't marker. It was dried blood. The next day, the HOA's former secretary, the nervous whistleblower, called Rebecca in tears. "They're cleaning house," she whispered. "Anyone who knows too much, they're either paid off or gone." She confessed what she had never said before. The HOA wasn't just mismanaging funds. Richard Harlan had ties to a local developer, a man named Victor Maddox. Maddox wasn't just building subdivisions. He was laundering money through them, using HOA fees and foreclosures to fuel a real estate scam that stretched across the county. And Riverton Estates? It was his biggest cash cow. The HOA wasn't protecting property values. They were protecting Maddox's empire. The threats intensified. Headlights again at night. But this time, Daniel saw faces. Two men in the front seat. They didn't move when he stared back. Mail missing. Weeks of letters gone. Rebecca warned him. They're tracking what you're filing. His daughter followed. After school, she noticed the same black SUV trailing her bus. She ran home in tears. Daniel's fear turned to fury. They want a war, he said to Rebecca. Then let's give them one. Rebecca and Daniel went after Maddox. They pulled property records, campaign donations, even drone photos of his construction sites. The deeper they dug, the worse it looked. Multiple shell LLCs owning foreclosed homes. Campaign contributions to city council members who blocked HOA reform laws. A private security firm run by Maddox's cousin, the same one neighbors saw idling outside Daniel's house. It wasn't just an HOA scandal. It was organized crime. Rebecca decided it was time to go federal. She arranged a meeting with a DOJ contact in Columbus. They packed files, deeds, receipts, everything they had. But halfway there, headlights filled Daniel's rearview mirror. A black SUV. Then another. Rebecca's voice trembled. They're following us. Daniel pressed the gas. The SUV stayed close. Finally, at a deserted stretch of Route 17, one SUV cut them off. Another boxed them in from behind. Masked men stepped out. Daniel's fist clenched the wheel. Rebecca whispered, "This is it." But then, flashing lights. Not from the SUVs. From cruisers. Police cruisers. For one terrifying moment, Daniel thought the cops were with Maddox. But as the cruisers spread out, doors flung open and rifles raised, a voice boomed. "Hands up! Federal warrant." The masked men froze. One bolted. Shots cracked the night. The SUVs were seized. The men cuffed. Rebecca exhaled like she hadn't breathed in hours. And stepping from one of the cruisers was a familiar face. The whistleblower. She pulled off a wire, handed it to an agent. She'd been working undercover. The next weeks tore Riverton apart. Richard Harlan was arrested for fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy. Victor Maddox faced federal charges for laundering millions through real estate shells. Half the HOA board resigned in disgrace. Investigators uncovered at least 7 families wrongfully foreclosed on. The community was stunned. What they thought was about paint colors and lawn care had been about greed, intimidation, and organized corruption all along. Daniel Carter, vindicated but scarred. He'd stood his ground, but the cost was high. His family would never feel truly safe in Riverton again. Rebecca Hall, fierce and unrelenting but shaken. For her, the case proved how thin the line is between community governance and outright exploitation. The residents, divided no more. They saw the truth. The HOA had been weaponized against them. Many swore never again. What would you do if your HOA tried to fine you $100 a day? Drop your thoughts below down arrow. If you found this story interesting, make sure you subscribe, comment, like, and share for more interesting warming stories.